know that you have a pretty tight presentation. We're a couple minutes in. Do you want to get started with your introduction?
Yeah, happy to. Absolutely. Yeah. So about me, I mean, you can read all this junk. It's whatever it is. But my background is I started out life as a web app developer quite a long time ago when my hair was not quite so gray. Did development for a while, then kind of flipped to the other side of the house and started doing security work, particularly pen testing work. Did pen testing work for a bunch of different places, TrustWave, Spider Laboratory, and etc. Kind of got tired of the wham, bam, thank you, ma'am style of pen testing and hopped over and started to the internal side of the house and created and ran the product security team at Rackspace. Did that for 3-4 years. Went on to Pearson and Duo Security and Cognizant Security. And kind of my thing has been doing security automation around AppSec. That's kind of been my bailiwick. And I've been involved in OWASP since 2008. Was on the board, the global board. So I've been kicking around the OWASP world for far too long.
Fair enough. So would you like, I have some questions that we can get started with, if that works for you.
Yeah, that's perfect. I'm perfectly content to start with some questions.
Great. So I grouped a few together, which were challenges with securing APIs. What are the most common misconceptions in API security? And what are the major risks facing APIs in your point of view? Yeah,
so let me bounce to here. So one of the things I think that's crucial about APIs and why we even have this conference, honestly, is because they're growing crazy. Like they're growing like crazy, and businesses are really pushing to adopt, use, and create more APIs than ever. The number 83% that's on screen is from Akamai. 83% of internet traffic is initiated by an API call, which is cray number. It's kind of ridiculous. A lot of companies are doing digital transformations primarily driven by pandemic reasons, but also other reasons. And that's 75% of CISOs are wanting to do that more. And you can't do a digital transformation without APIs. And then cloud, if you're using cloud, you're calling APIs. That's how they work, right? That's how Rackspace and everybody else who's a cloud provider, that's how those things work. So you can't sort of get away from it. You couple that with the fact that you may or may not be able to add a little bit of FTE staff to whatever your current grouping is, and you bump it against I want to do microservices, we're doing a digital transformation, we're being agile, and we want continuous delivery. All these things. Oh, interesting. It seems you're sharing from a huge screen and we don't see all your slides. Oh, weird. Yeah, let me stop sharing and reshare. See if I can make that work. No, this one. Hopefully that makes it better.
I think it still looks the same. It kind of cuts off. It cuts off at microservices.
Does that help? Made the window smaller.
Oh, hey.
Okay, yay. Okay, that's weird. I have a huge ultra wide screen. So yes, it's a little window in the corner. But I made it smaller and I'm glad you guys can see it. But anyway, the whole point of this particular slide that we're on is that the lag time between the ability for security to react to new APIs and the increase of APIs, it just doesn't match. And then in terms of things like misconceptions, I mean, if you read Wikipedia, right, APIs, they're stupidly simple, right? It's my application calls your application over a network. I ask for something, your program gives it back to me. It can be in whatever language we want. That seems very straightforward. Unfortunately, when you get to do these for real and beyond a Wikipedia entry, right, they look more like this. You have a bunch of different pieces of infrastructure all playing together that gives you the sort of security landscape of your APIs. And all of these little pieces that may be on-prem or in a cloud provider or with a third party or some kind of SaaS provider, right? All these things have to play nice together. And so they're fairly complicated. I think one of the misconceptions is they seem simple in isolation, but when you look at the overall system that powers an API-driven, say, web service, web application or or like a mobile front end, right, you end up having a lot of moving parts. The other thing is when you're looking at the various different areas where APIs kind of touch operations at the developer, at the code level, APIs have been around for a long time. Shoot, I remember doing XML RPC back in the late 90s. Dated myself. But the biggest thing is that like doing APIs at scale, they were usually these one-off little things, but doing APIs at scale, not a lot of developers have a lot of road time doing those, particularly with the more complicated auth-in and auth-z authentication and authorization systems we have today, right? Those didn't exist in the past. And so I think that's hurting developers. The other thing that's also not helping developers, I don't know if I'd call it hurting, is a lot of the frameworks are designed to make creating APIs really fast. Those automatically creating API frameworks, although they're great for velocity, they're kind of terrible in some cases for security because they'll do these automatic handling of data, and that's how you get mass assignment and some of the other problems you see with APIs today. And then finally, when I was testing APIs, oh my, like the documentation did not match reality in so many cases. And in one case, I had to get the client and actually upstream proxy the client to capture the traffic to see how to talk to the API because the docs were so wrong. When you're deploying, right, you're deploying APIs, particularly if you're in a CI/CD world, you're deploying new and updated APIs on a somewhat continuous basis, and it's very hard for a security team to move that fast. And there's a lot of times, if there are security checks of, like, it's a security assessment of APIs, it's ad hoc or secondhand at best, where you say, I've got a web application that's backed by APIs. I'll test the web application. Therefore, I've tested the APIs, which isn't completely incorrect, but it's also not the complete coverage of the API, particularly if there isn't a one-to-one map of web app calls and API calls. When you're operating them, like I said, there's a whole bunch of different pieces that are going there. And you have to worry about legacy and drift. Like this has been an IT problem since we fired up our first computer, like the old unsexy system that nobody wants to work on, right? The legacy thing, which is almost a swear word, right? Those have to be handled and deprecated. And a lot of times they're just sort of left on forever. Anyway, I won't dime out a previous employer, but I found a system that had not been in use, needed for 4 years, that was still up and running in production at one place I worked without diming out a previous employer. And then defensive controls. A lot of people think, hey, I've got a reasonably good AppSec program. Like, what does it matter, right? I can cover APIs with AppSec, and there's a decent amount of coverage between APIs and AppSec, but not necessarily enough coverage to cover APIs. You get partial coverage, but not great coverage. And actually, and then you probably have an incomplete API asset inventory. Based on talking to our customers, yeah, most people have no clue how many APIs they have. And so when I was talking about that AppSec versus API security, this is sort of a good Venn diagram of the superset of those two things. And where you do get some overlap with SAST and SCA and a little bit of DAST and a little bit of SDLC, you don't touch in a lot of the API specific things if your tooling isn't up to date and isn't sort of API aware. So this is a really big gap where you might think like, hey, I've got a bunch of AppSec tooling. I've got a fairly progressive modern AppSec program. I should be good. Well, there's a bunch of stuff that you only do for APIs that won't be there. And then quickly, I should touch on the OWASP has top 10, the OWASP top 10 has had it since 2007. There's a variant called the API top 10. And this is a fantastic, if you want to get an idea, just an overview of risks. I won't cover it today because we have limited time, but this is a great read if you want to get a good, strong overview of the risks. And then if you look at, and by the way, I just need to say this. There are 13 top 10 lists on the OWASP project site. So we could have a top 10 of top 10s, but we don't, thank goodness. So this is the API top 10, not the traditional API 10. There's some overlap, but they are very different. And if you want API specific, this is the one for you. And then if you look at what the API top 10 gives you and your sort of traditional controls, secure coding can tick the boxes of giving you some coverage on some of those top 10, but not all of them. A WAF gives you minimal or partial or maybe some coverage on a good chunk of them, but not all of them. And an API gateway, same thing. So I think one of the reasons why security around APIs has become such a thing is that our existing controls almost give you a false sense of protection, right? I've got a gateway, I've got a WAF. They're supposed to protect web appy things, right? But the APIs are different enough that coverage really doesn't work. And then just as an example, right, here's Ebola Attack. This is number 1 on the API top 10, where I have Benjamin making a request to get his account balance through a mobile app, right? And it looks like with the request and response, hopefully that's readable. It might be kind of small. I apologize. And what happens in Ebola Attack is I change the account to a different account number, and suddenly I'm reading Charlotte's balance, right? And this happens quite frequently. Ebola attacks, that's one of the reasons why it's number 1 on the OWASP API top 10. And also for completeness, I did a webinar rather on Are You Safe from OWASP number 11. Remember, it is the top 10, which means there are things that aren't in that list. So it would do you I would do you a disservice to say that the top 10 is it. There's more than that. Although they're written very broadly these days, you need to think beyond just the top 10. And I think I've beat that dead horse. Hopefully. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
So I think you actually covered a lot of the questions that were sent to us in advance, but I'm going to throw one at you here. So
Okay.
What types of mitigations can be employed within enterprise environments to better secure APIs if you don't have that Jurassic Park budget?
Yeah, so if you're limited on budget and have to make that work, that's really interesting. Like, honestly, I've been in the free software world since the late 90s. I think it was my first contribution to an open source project. So really what it comes with open source and generally zero cost and commercial stuff is time or money, right? That's the trade-off, right? So if you don't have money, unfortunately, you kind of have to invest time. There's a number of good open source tools, and actually I created this webpage on the OWASP website that lists a bunch of tools and if they're open source and what platforms they run on and if they're SaaS. And so I would say go to this website and grab that tool list. And I have somewhere in here, I have a list. I have this on one of the pages way down in my slide deck. I'm going to I apologize for doing this. I'm going to jump really fast to this. There we go. That's a nice, good, readable URL for it. You can find it under the community contributions pages of the OWASP website, API security tools. But that's a great way if you need to sort of augment an existing program, but you don't currently have budget. The other thing is like licensing around tooling is pretty interesting. Some of it is based on like metered usage, almost like cloud, like how much data is coming in and out of your APIs. Other license styles I've seen are based on number of APIs. So depending on how many APIs, you might be able to sort of get under a budget hurdle if your license model is number of APIs versus traffic, right? If you have a small number of APIs that are very busy, the per API license model works in your favor.
So you also mentioned, time and money. One of the questions we did get in advance was how much time do you actually think it takes to roll out a strategy for a medium-sized enterprise?
Okay, perfect. Let me have something on this. I got to find that slide. Oh, so I know where I was thinking when I was reading this question. I want to do one thing here and provide what I consider to be the definition of an API, particularly from a security perspective or security controls perspective, right? Because to really understand an API and make a security decision around it, you need to understand three things: the host that it's running on, the path, right? Whatever the method is, basically in API speak, and then, the path, and then the HTTP method, right? The get, put, post, patch, whatever. Because a get to all users, which is this first example here, right? A get to all users is very different than deleting all users, even though the host and the path are exactly the same. The only thing that's different is the HTTP method. And then if you look at a post to UAT, or user acceptance testing, to add an admin is very different than adding an admin in production. So a lot of the tooling, particularly the stuff that's grown up in the traditional web app world, don't have this level of granularity. They don't make a distinction a lot of times on the method level, and that can really bite you. So just I wanted to get that up front. And the way I think about doing any kind of API security program is I look at three things. There's three major areas that you have to cover. And selfishly, my workshop yesterday was 50 minutes of this. So if you really want to know, find the recording and go watch it. But there's three things. API posture, which is understanding what you have. Like, I just need an inventory of all the APIs and the data going in and out of them, and how do I make that work? Runtime, which is understanding what's going on a running API and what normal traffic looks like, so you can do anomaly detection and find abnormal traffic. And then shifting left, or testing, right? Doing testing against running APIs as quickly as possible. And at least for APIs, I kind of exclude SAST and DAST under the assumption that you already have that in place for a AppSec program. And the same SAST tool and SCA tool and those kind of things that you have for normal, air quotes, applications work fine for APIs as well. I think I've got a couple other slides on this, but I don't need to like beat the dead horse. But so, and then, I mean, not surprisingly, Noname's platform does all three of these. And I mean, I work there, so I think it does them rather well, but go figure, right?
We'll trust you on that one.
Yeah.
So we are coming up a bit on time. We still have a few minutes, though. Is there any questions from any of our attendees that we want to answer? And or Matt, any words of wisdom that you have for us?
I would say, well, if nothing else, I would say start slow. You can get some incredible value just in getting a handle on how many APIs you have and the data within them. Which is one of the reasons why I skipped to this slide. If you can get that inventory, it helps you in a number of different ways, right? One, you inevitably have constrained resources. You're not going to have all the people and all the time to do all the things, right? So you have to make choices as a manager of a team. And if I have a good, solid inventory I can trust, I can make really well-informed decisions, right? And sort of drive what is a guess of the best thing to work on to a decision, because now I have actionable information. And so even just getting an inventory down can really help you focus the rest of your program. And it's kind of a fundamental baseline you need to have an effective program, I think.
Do you think that's what would make a CISO sleep better at night?
Well, certainly a CISO would have an idea of how risky or unrisky, right, his APIs are, his or her APIs are, right? So yeah, I think having a smell test then gives you a good, I don't know, for lack of a better word, a gut check on what your life is going to be like trying to wrangle these APIs. You know, I talked to a bunch of people. Some of my friends were telling me like they are having a dramatic push to get APIs out the door quicker, faster, and they don't feel like they have the visibility into them yet to say, okay, right, and feel sleep at night with the fact that APIs are walking out the door at a great speed. And so, yeah, I would say doing that. And then once you get that, then you can really start focusing on the areas that are high risk and hopefully knock down some of that, existing risk that you regrettably will find when you start flipping over rocks.
Fair enough. Yes. Thank you for that insight. I don't see any questions or comments in the chat, so happy to give people 4 minutes back of their time. Thank you, Matt, so much for presenting and for sharing all of this knowledge with us. I'm sure that everybody appreciates it very much, and hopefully everybody will sleep a little bit better tonight.
Hopefully. All right. Thank you very much. This was fun.
Thank you.
All right.